Coming up in 21st century, a special focus on HIV/AIDS. Where does the world stand on the epidemic? The AIDS activists who changed the world. And in South Africa, why young women are at greater risk than young men. Hello and welcome to this special edition of 21st Century on HIV/AIDS. I'm Victoria Ido. HIV/AIDS epidemic. Where does the world stand? The latest facts and figures on global progress towards ending HIV/AIDS as a public health threat and the work that still needs to be done. Here is a short explainer.
The goal is to end the AIDS epidemic by 2030.
Fears over how the AIDS virus is spread.
Back in the early 1980s, HIV infection was often seen as a death sentence. By 2000, more than 28 million people were living with HIV, but only 1 in 50 received antiretroviral medicines. Overall, 35 million people have died and 76 million have become infected. But today, the scales have tipped. Yearly, AIDS-related deaths have almost halved since 2005. More than 50% of people living with HIV have access to treatment. And a person living with HIV who starts treatment today has the same life expectancy as someone who is free of HIV infection. Pressure from the global AIDS movement has made medicines affordable in almost every country. $75 will cover an adult for an entire year. But there is still much work to do. 17 million people living with HIV still don't have access to treatment. Young women in sub-Saharan Africa are especially at risk. Their rate of new HIV infections is 44% higher than among young men. AIDS-related deaths have risen in the Middle East, North Africa, and also in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, where people who inject drugs account for nearly half of new infections. AIDS is not over, but it can be. UNAIDS, leading the global effort to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030.
Sawyer is one of the longest-term survivors of HIV/AIDS. After losing loved ones to AIDS, he joined the front lines of a movement that later changed the world's response to HIV/AIDS. This is his story and his fight against AIDS epidemic since the 1980s.
Act up! Fight back, fight AIDS. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. I contracted HIV before the discovery of the HIV virus.
My name is Sawyer. I'm 63 years old. I grew up in upstate New York in basically farm country. My father was a truck driver and my mother a stay-at-home housewife. They were relatively conservative.
This is me here.
I was quite shy as a young, as a young kid. I think that was largely because I felt different. It wasn't until graduate school that I really came out.
That's me as a wrestler.
We really were at just the very beginning of the LGBT rights movement.
They've rejected men in that sense.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
As time passed on, more and more people became symptomatic with these illnesses and dying, very rapid, pretty painful and horribly disfiguring deaths. No one knew the cause of the illness, no one knew how to prevent getting it. Pretty much everyone who got sick from it was dying in 6 to 12 months.
AIDS was once found only among sexually active gay men, but not anymore.
This is Scott here. He died when he was 32.
First person that I knew really well who came down with full-blown AIDS was my boyfriend. His name was Scott Bernard, and he came down with Kaposi sarcoma in the fall of 1984. The level of stigma and discrimination that people with AIDS faced at that time, especially people who were visibly infected and symptomatic, was really horrible. There were a number of incidents for when my boyfriend and I would enter a subway car, and here he was, no hair, you know, looked like a skeleton, covered with these you know, purple callus-like lesions, and people would like literally part away from us. We went into a restaurant one time and he sat down and, you know, he drank some of the water, and the waitress came over, instead of taking our order, was carrying a garbage can and picked up his glass of water and threw it in the garbage can and wiped all of the silverware into the garbage can and started yelling, "Get out, get out! We don't serve disease faggots in this place." I was really, really upset that I couldn't do anything to help save his life.